Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Rising Like Incense podcast. I'm your host, Tom Canuel, and in today's episode, we are going to be talking about history. Now, during our last episode, we talked a bit about what an ecumenical council like Vatican II is. But in order to understand why Vatican II needed to talk about liturgy, we need to look back and understand a bit about the history and what exactly were the problems originating in the church at the time. As the Apollo 13 astronaut said so perfectly,
Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here.
and yes, indeed, we had a series of problems in the Catholic Church concerning liturgy at this time. Now, before we begin, just to clarify, in a short episode such as this, there cannot be a comprehensive history of the stuff leading up to Vatican II by any stretch. So if you want to learn more, be sure to find the resources that are linked to our website, which is linked in the description of this series. So with that said, let's dive in. I want to begin today's episode with the reflections of Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, a higher ranking bishop present at Vatican II who would be elected as Pope in the 2000s and become better known as Benedict XVI. In the years following the council, Ratzinger wrote a series of theological highlights which provided important reflections on his experience of Vatican II. In reflecting on the opening ceremonies of Vatican II, this is what he had to say. Quote, "There was a certain feeling of exhilaration at the opening of the council in Rome, the mysterious sense of new beginnings that has a way of stirring man and propelling him forward. This was even more true in that here one could feel the imminence of an event of historic significance. The mighty basilica, the grandeur of the ancient liturgy, the colorful diversity of the visitors from all around the world. All of this was magnificently impressive. Yet there was, on the other hand, an undeniable uneasiness, whose most obvious symptom was annoyance with the endlessly long ceremonies. This was surely no objective criterion, but it did reveal something deeper, namely that the opening liturgy did not really involve all who were present, and it had little inner coherence. Involvement and coherence are the two words that I want to focus on in today's podcast, because the century leading up to Vatican II was a century which had to figure out how to promote involvement and coherence among Catholics who were regularly going to Mass and were involved in the life of the Church. We begin this search by observing the state of Catholicism in the 19th century and where the struggle of active participation originated. You see, parishes in the 19th and 20th centuries looked very different in some regards from what they look like today. In Europe, the French Revolution increased hostility towards Catholics until Napoleon led a series of wars to conquer most of the continent. Wars and revolutions would continue to break out throughout the century and would affect the Holy Roman Empire, France, Italy, Germany, and many other countries. Catholics who were left were typically uneducated, poor, and marginalized, while many religious orders, like the Congregation of the Holy Cross, Notre Dame reference, would form and expand their missionary work. The average Catholic tended to not pay attention to the liturgy. Parishes across Europe and America saw an increase in private devotions, particularly the Stations of the Cross and the Rosary, that were usually said in the middle of Mass. Lay Catholics, as we can otherwise call them, were also rarely receiving the Eucharist, while musical selections also made it difficult to enter into the Mass. Music typically came from forms of polyphony, which were written during the Renaissance and Baroque periods of music history, which lasted from roughly the 1500s until the beginning of the 1800s. Taking a little bit here from my background in music, Polyphony means multiple voices and can take several forms. The most common forms during those periods were canons, where voices repeated the same melody at different starting points. Additionally, there was also counterpoint, where those same repeated lines contained different harmonies but would still overlap at different points. If you're interested in discovering a few examples of this, I've included a couple links in our website that include William Byrd's Ave Verum Corpus and Palestrina's Sicut Cervus. These are beautiful works, but also, if you notice, they can be very difficult to follow along with at times and difficult to participate in unless you are a member of a choir, much like I was in undergrad. So again, I've linked a video to both of those songs in the fervor reading section of our website if you want to hear it for yourself. It is in this context that we turn our attention to France. Prosper Guéranger was a Benedictine monk who in the 1820s refounded a medieval monastery, the Abbey of Solesmes. Solesmes was specifically designed to create a monastic community anchored in the liturgy. The Abbey, which is still around today, was an experiment which sought to find innovative pathways to encourage the members of the community to participate. One way Solesmes did this was by reintegrating Gregorian chant into the liturgy and prayers of the community. This was so successful that other abbeys in Europe and the US would follow. And this would cause Pope St. Pius X to write Trolla Solicitandi in 1903, a letter which would encourage the wider spread of Gregorian chant throughout the Western Church. However, more was needed to be done to promote participation among the laity. And for that, we turn our attention to another monk from Belgium. From about 1909 to 1913, Dom Lambert Baudin gave a series of conferences and lectures addressing the need for active participation among the faithful. According to scholar John O'Malley, Father Baudin believed that the liturgy should be, quote, the center of the devotional life of Catholics, and that it was, quote, the church's most powerful instrument for the spiritual rebirth of society at large. You see, Baudin argued that the best way to promote participation was by helping congregations to understand the Mass better. So he would encourage the church to begin publishing the Roman Missal, the book that we use for every single Mass, in all different kinds of languages, so members of the lay faithful could follow along with the parts of the Mass. The impact of this idea was so powerful that over the next 20 years, missals were made widely available on a global scale. Father Baudin would go on to found the liturgical movement, an academic movement focused on trying to reform the liturgy for the modern world, and a movement which would spread across America and parts of Europe throughout the beginning of the 20th century. Active participation would become a cornerstone part of this movement. Although there's a lot more we could cover, I want to end with one more important figure, Pope Pius XII. Pius XII issued all kinds of reforms to the liturgy during the 1950s, but I want to focus on one work from the 1940s. Shortly after World War II, Pius XII wrote a letter or an encyclical document, as it's otherwise called, titled Mediator Dei. In it, Pius XII would write about many topics concerning the liturgy, emphasizing how the church needed to be open to but cautious about the reforms called for by the liturgical movement, how the church needed to promote growth in the development of sacred art and music, and how Gregorian chant needed to take the primary place as the main form of liturgical music. However, Pius XII's biggest contribution in this letter came from how he regarded the nature of the liturgy. And this is what he said. The liturgy, quote, grows, matures, develops, adapts, and accommodates herself to temporal needs and circumstances. provided only that the integrity of her doctrine be safeguarded. This is extremely important, that the liturgy, quote, grows, matures, develops, adapts, and accommodates herself to temporal needs and circumstances. It is precisely this understanding that the Church can adapt and accommodate that paves the way for Vatican II. So, with this said, coming up in our next episode, we'll pick up right where we left off today. We'll talk about what the Council actually said in Sacrosanctum Concilium regarding liturgical aesthetics, and how art and beauty should be both noble and simple. In the meantime, my name is Tom Canuel, and I'll see you next time on Rising Like Incense.